Every spring, millions of gardeners repeat the same exhausting ritual. They buy seeds, clear beds, plant, hope, and then start over, year after year. But what if that cycle is a complete waste of time and money, engineered more by industry than by nature? There are 9 vegetables you could plant once and harvest for decades, yet most people have never even heard their names. Why were these plants nearly erased from modern gardens? And what happens to a gardener brave enough to break free? Maya kneels in the half-thawed mud, hands stiff from the cold, prying last year's tangled roots out of the ground. Each spring, her calendar fills with the same chores, pulling weeds that survived the winter, hauling compost by the bucket, and wrestling with clumps of earth that refuse to yield. The seed packets, ordered months ago in a burst of hope, pile up in the kitchen, each one a promise and a deadline. She sorts them by planting date, double-checks frost charts, and sketches new bed layouts on scrap paper, trying to fit everything into the same tired garden plot. The work never seems to end. Beds must be raked smooth, soil turned and amended, stones picked out by hand. Maya spends hours hunched over, planting row after row of tiny seeds like carrots, lettuce, and beans, each one destined to vanish with the first dry spell or slug attack. Watering becomes a daily ritual, sometimes twice a day in early heat waves. Seedlings wilt if she misses even a morning. By the time the first shoots appear, her back aches and her hands are raw, but the real battle is just beginning. Pests return like clockwork. Aphids cluster on the undersides of leaves, cutworms slice through stems overnight, and every morning brings new damage to inspect. Maya mixes sprays, sets traps, and checks for signs of blight, always a step behind. She rotates crops as best she can, but the narrow space means someone always ends up where they grew last year. By midsummer, weeds reclaim the paths and the compost pile grows with plants that never made it to harvest. The cycle grinds on. Harvest what survives, clear the beds, and start again next spring. No matter how much effort she pours in, the garden demands more. The promise of homegrown food comes at the price of endless repetition, hours lost, knees bruised, and hope stretched thin by the time fall frost ends the season. Maya stands at the edge of her garden, mud still clinging to her boots, staring at the empty rows she has spent years fighting to keep productive. The exhaustion is familiar, but this time something different stirs, a quiet refusal to keep repeating the same mistakes. She pulls out her notebook, not to sketch the usual rotation or tally seed orders, but to ask a question she has never let herself consider. What if she did not have to start from scratch every spring? The idea sounds reckless at first, almost like giving up. Yet as she flips through pages of old plans and receipts, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every year, the same cycle of buying, digging, planting, and hoping, only to watch most of it disappear by fall. She remembers the stories her grandmother told, plants that came back on their own, beds that filled themselves with food without constant coaxing. It is a memory that feels both distant and urgent. Maya searches for answers beyond the usual advice, looking for something that does not require her to pour in endless energy for a fleeting reward. She finds whispers of another way, crops that demand patience at the start, but repay it for decades, not months. The promise is simple: invest once, harvest for years. No more annual scramble for seeds and supplies, no more bending to the calendar's demands. Instead, a garden that grows stronger and more generous with time, rooted in the soil and in memory. She circles a blank space in her plan and writes one word: perennials. There is risk in abandoning what is familiar, and she knows it. But the thought of working with nature instead of against it offers a kind of hope she has not felt in seasons. Maya decides to try, not because she is certain it will work, but because she is tired of working so hard for so little. She closes the notebook and heads inside, resolved to break the cycle, one deliberate choice at a time. In the late 19th century, American gardeners leafed through thick, illustrated seed catalogues that promised a world of possibilities. Pages were crowded with names now familiar: beans, lettuce, tomatoes, but nestled among the annuals were offerings that have faded from today's memory. The 1880 James J. H. Gregory catalogue devoted space to asparagus crowns, rhubarb roots, and even perennial sorrel, sold as a one-time investment for years of harvest. Chester B. Dow's 1880 listings bundled seeds and plants together, blurring the line between what would need replanting and what would return on its own. Dingy and Conard's Rose Guides from 1881 and 1889 highlighted not just flowers, but hardy perennials, shrubs and bulbs, signalling that permanence once counted as a selling point. By 1890, John Gardner and Comey still promoted heirloom varieties, with perennial food plants quietly holding their ground. Fruit trees, berry bushes, and edible roots were all part of the standard offering. In 1919, entire catalogues featured bulbs and tubers, anemones, lilies, gladioli, many of them perennial, meant to naturalize and multiply over time. Even by 1940, companies like Benton County Nursery included fruit trees and long-lived plants alongside their annual seeds, treating perennials as practical, not exotic. The language in these documents reflects a different kind of gardening economy. Early catalogue writers pitched perennials as a way to build abundance that would last, describing orchards as earthly paradise and berry patches as a family legacy. These were not just ornamental, they were food systems designed to persist. Yet, as the decades passed, the balance began to tip. The rise of annual hybrids, especially after Burpee's innovations in the late 1800s, made replanting an annual ritual. Seed companies found steady revenue in the promise of new varieties each spring. Catalogues grew thicker with annuals, while the space devoted to perennials shrank, sometimes disappearing into the background. Archival evidence from these catalogues doesn't show a sudden disappearance, but a quiet shift. The perennial listings that once offered gardeners freedom from yearly toil gradually gave way to the repeat business of annual seeds. What began as a partnership with time, plant once and harvest for years, slowly faded from the mainstream, leaving behind only hints in old catalogue pages and the memories of those who remember planting for the long haul. Rows of canned beans and frozen peas began filling supermarket shelves in the years after World War II. Factories scaled up production, pushing out millions of tins and bags each season, most packed with annual vegetables bred for uniformity and speed. By 1955, processed vegetables accounted for over half of all US vegetable sales. And by the early 1960s, the volume of frozen vegetables had tripled in just a decade. This shift did not just change what families ate, it transformed what was grown and how. Food companies needed crops that could be harvested all at once, stored for months, and processed by machines. Annuals, like sweet corn, green beans, and tomatoes, fit perfectly into this model. They could be planted, harvested, and replanted in tight cycles, keeping factory lines running and grocery shelves stocked year-round. Perennials, with their unpredictable yields and long establishment times, did not fit the pace of industrial production. They were quietly edged out, not by a single decision, but by the slow weight of economic momentum and technological convenience. Seed companies followed the money. Annual seeds became a reliable source of repeat sales, with gardeners returning each spring for the latest hybrids. Perennials, which only needed to be planted once, offered little incentive for companies built on annual turnover. Over time, catalogues and garden centres became dominated by annuals, while perennials faded from view. The supermarket's endless supply of processed vegetables masked the loss, making it easy to forget that many of the world's most resilient food plants had slipped out of reach. Today, it is rare to find perennial vegetables in mainstream garden centers or grocery aisles. Most shoppers and home gardeners have never tasted perennial sorrel or dug a Jerusalem artichoke. The processed food era did not just change diets, it erased a legacy of low-maintenance abundance that once anchored gardens for generations. The scarcity of perennials in the modern marketplace is not an accident. It is the result of decades of industry momentum favoring crops that keep the wheels of commerce spinning season after season. Beneath the surface, perennial vegetables operate on a different schedule. Their roots don't stop at the shallow topsoil, scraped by annuals each spring. They reach deep, weaving through layers untouched by a spade. Over time, these roots form a living network that taps water reserves far below the reach of lettuce or beans. In a 2016 study on native perennial gardens, researchers found that established beds used 70% less irrigation than annual plots. That kind of efficiency doesn't come from luck, it is built into the biology of the plants themselves. As roots push deeper, they draw moisture during drought, buffer against sudden downpours, and keep the soil anchored through storms. The ground stays cooler and more resilient, even as summer heat intensifies. This underground power isn't just about saving water. Deep-rooted perennials pull nutrients from mineral layers well below the annual zone, cycling them back to the surface with each new leaf and shoot. The result is a system that feeds itself, needing fewer fertilizers with every passing year. In gardens where water restrictions are common or where rainfall comes in unpredictable bursts, these plants provide a steady harvest when annuals would shrivel. The difference becomes clear during dry spells. Perennial beds stay green and productive while shallow-rooted crops wilt and fade. Long-term studies show that once perennials are established, their water needs drop dramatically. The same roots that anchor them for decades also act as conduits, storing moisture through dry months and releasing it slowly to the plant above. This means less time hauling hoses, fewer worries about missed waterings, and a garden that thrives on rainfall alone. For anyone tired of watching their efforts evaporate with each heatwave, the lesson is clear. Deep roots aren't just a survival trick, they are a blueprint for abundance. Built to last through whatever the weather brings. Soil scientists in Minnesota gathered samples from a 5-year perennial vegetable trial, measuring not just growth above ground, but what happened beneath the surface. Their findings show that perennial beds increased soil carbon by nearly 1.2 metric tons per hectare each year, 4 times the minimum threshold set for meaningful climate impact. This single metric carries weight, showing that perennial roots do not just feed plants, but rebuild the very ground they grow in. Breeders have taken up the challenge, pushing old varieties further. At the Land Institute, Lee DeHaan's team has spent 2 decades crossing wild relatives with edible grains, creating perennial wheatgrass that survives winter after winter, sending roots 12 feet down. DeHaan says perennials are the future of sustainable food, pointing to rows that have not seen a plow in years. Each season, the plants come back stronger, their root systems thickening, their yields holding steady even as surrounding annual fields falter in drought. Growers in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest report similar results. Fields of perennial vegetables like sunchokes and sea kale stand green through late summer heat waves, while annual beds nearby wilt and brown. Labor records from these trials show a drop in maintenance after the first year, with weeding, watering, and fertilizing demands falling sharply, replaced by simple harvest routines. Sarah Singleton, a plant breeder, says it is a different kind of work. You invest up front, then let the plants do what they are built to do. The proof is not just in the soil or the science, it is in the rhythm of gardens that no longer need to be torn apart and rebuilt each spring. Breeding programs continue to refine flavor, resilience, and yield. But the foundation is already established, and perennials deliver stability and abundance year after year, with less intervention and more return. The evidence is no longer theoretical. It is growing in fields, written into the soil and echoed by those who have watched their gardens transform from a seasonal struggle into a source of lasting plenty. 9. Perennial vegetables stand out for anyone ready to leave behind the endless cycle of replanting. Asparagus tops the list, a spring staple that, once established, sends up tender shoots for decades. Rhubarb follows, its tart, red stalks returning each year, ready for pies and preserves. Horseradish, with its fiery roots, grows stronger the longer it is left in the ground, offering a sharp kick to sauces and sandwiches. Jerusalem artichokes, known as sunchokes, produce knobby, nutty tubers beneath tall sunflowers, thriving in poor soils and multiplying each season. Sorrel brings lemon bright leaves to the table as early as March, a perennial green that shrugs off frost and heat alike. Chives and their cousin, garlic chives, provide mild onion flavor from the first thaw until snowfall, their clumps thickening with every year. Walking onions earn their name by planting themselves. Bulblets form at the top and bend the stalk to the ground, starting new clusters without help. Lovage towers over the bed, its celery-scented stems and leaves flavoring soups and stocks. Finally, perennial kale, like Dorbenton or tree kale, offers sturdy greens that survive winter and send up new shoots for years. Each of these plants asks for patience at the start, but the reward is a garden that grows richer, not emptier, with time. Maya scrolls through specialty nursery websites, comparing prices and reading reviews from growers who claim their perennial beds have outlasted a decade of storms and droughts. She orders crowns and root cuttings, rhubarb, asparagus, horseradish, and a paper bag of Jerusalem artichokes, paying just under $125 for the lot, less than what she spent on annual seeds and supplies last spring alone. Packages arrive in waves, each one stamped with a narrow planting window. There is no time to wait. She clears a new bed, hauls compost, and sets each root with care, spacing them wide for the years ahead. The work is concentrated, but it feels different. No frantic race against frost, just a steady rhythm as each plant settles in. The first season tests her patience. Shoots appear, but harvests are sparse. By year 2, the beds thicken. By the third spring, Maya's notebook tells a new story. The garden pays for itself. The asparagus patch alone yields enough in April to match its original cost, and the sunchokes multiply so quickly she shares tubers with neighbors. Instead of fighting the calendar, Maya walks out with a basket and returns with armfuls of food. The cycle has broken. She plants once, and the harvests keep coming. No more annual scramble, just the quiet triumph of abundance returning on its own. Today, nearly 90% of vegetables grown in home gardens are still annuals, locking most growers into the same costly routines. As food prices rise and climate extremes intensify, perennial crops offer a resilient alternative hiding in plain sight. The future of abundance may depend not on what we plant each year, but on what we choose to plant for a lifetime. What would you plant if you never had to start over?